It was a quiet, unassuming afternoon when Keanu Reeves decided to step out of his usual routine. The sky outside was overcast, with soft rain drizzling down onto the streets of Los Angeles. It wasn't the kind of weather that made people want to leave their homes unless they absolutely had to. But for Keanu, it felt like the perfect day to go somewhere simple and comforting, somewhere where no one would expect to find him. That's how he ended up walking into a local KFC. Keanu had always been known for his laid-back personality and humble nature. Despite being one of Hollywood's biggest stars, he rarely sought attention or flashy experiences. On this particular day, all he wanted was a hot meal and maybe some time to himself. He slipped through the glass doors of the restaurant, blending seamlessly into the crowd. His dark jeans, plain white t-shirt, and leather jacket didn't scream celebrity. If anything, he looked like just another customer trying to escape the gloomy weather. The KFC was bustling with activity. Families with young children sat at tables scattered around the dining area, chatting and laughing as they enjoyed their meals. Teenagers huddled together near the soda machines, sipping on oversized cups of cola while scrolling through their phones. A few delivery drivers waited patiently by the counter, checking their watches as employees worked quickly to fill their orders. There was a comforting hum of conversation mixed with the clinking of trays and the faint smell of fried chicken, wafting through the air. Keanu joined the line, pulling his hood up slightly to shield himself from the lingering chill of the rain. He glanced around casually, taking in the scene before him. It was easy to feel anonymous here, surrounded by ordinary people going about their day. No paparazzi lurking nearby, no fans clamoring for selfies. It was exactly what he needed. Or so he thought. As he stood there, scrolling idly through his phone to pass the time, he noticed two little girls sitting at a nearby table. They couldn't have been more than 8 and 5 years old. The older one had curly brown hair tied back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a bright yellow sweater that seemed to glow against the dull grayness of the rainy afternoon. Her younger sister, dressed in a pink dress adorned with tiny flowers, clutched a stuffed bear tightly to her chest. Both girls were deep in conversation, their heads bent close together as they whispered animatedly. At first, Keanu didn't pay them much attention. Kids often came into places like this excited to share a meal with their families or simply enjoy the novelty of eating out. But something about these two caught his eye. Every now and then, they'd glance over at him, their eyes wide with curiosity. At one point, the older girl nudged her sister, pointing discreetly in his direction. Keanu couldn't help but smile faintly. He was used to being recognized in public, though it happened less frequently than most people assumed. Still, there was something different about the way these girls were looking at him. Not the usual excitement or awe, but something softer, almost thoughtful. When it was finally his turn to order, Keanu stepped up to the counter. He kept things simple. A chicken sandwich combo with extra fries. As he paid and waited for his food, he felt a light tug on his sleeve. Turning around, he found himself face to face with the two sisters who had been watching him earlier. Their cheeks were flushed, either from nervousness or the warmth of the restaurant. He couldn't tell which. "Are you really Keanu?" the older girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at him with big, hopeful eyes, clutching her sister's hand tightly. Keanu crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to their level. "Yeah, I am," he replied with a warm smile. "What's your name?" "I'm Lily," the older girl said proudly, puffing out her chest a little. "And this is my sister, Emma." She gestured toward the younger girl who shyly buried her face in her bear's fur. Keanu chuckled softly. "Nice to meet you both," he said. "Do you guys come here often?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "We love KFC," she exclaimed, "but we've never seen anyone famous here before." Her words carried a mix of wonder and disbelief, as if she couldn't quite believe her luck. For a moment, Keanu considered offering to take a picture with them or signing a napkin, simple gestures he'd done countless times before. But then Emma spoke up, her voice trembling yet clear. "Can we tell you something?" she asked, her grip on her bear tightening. Keanu hesitated, surprised by the seriousness in her tone. "Of course," he said gently, leaning in closer. "What is it?" The girls exchanged a quick glance as if silently deciding who should speak first. Finally, Lily took a deep breath and began. "We think you're sad," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. Keanu froze, caught off guard by the unexpected observation. "Sad?" He forced a small laugh, trying to mask his discomfort. "Why would you say that?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Emma, emboldened by her sister's courage, chimed in next. "Because we've seen your movies," she explained, her voice growing stronger despite her shyness. "And sometimes people who act brave are actually very lonely." Her words hit Keanu like a ton of bricks. He stared at them, momentarily speechless. How could two little girls, complete strangers, see so deeply into his soul? In that instant, the noise of the crowded restaurant faded away, leaving only the weight of their observation hanging in the air between them. The words hung in the air between Keanu and the two little girls, heavy with meaning. Emma's soft voice echoed in his mind. Sometimes people who act brave are actually very lonely. It was as if she had reached into his soul and pulled out a truth he'd spent years trying to hide, not just from others, but from himself. For a moment, Keanu wasn't sure how to respond. His initial instinct was to laugh it off, to brush their observation aside with a casual joke or a dismissive smile. After all, what could two children possibly know about the complexities of adult emotions? But something stopped him. There was an honesty in their eyes, a purity that made it impossible to ignore. Lily, sensing his hesitation, took a step closer. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with the kind of intensity only a child could muster. "It's okay," she said earnestly. "You don't have to pretend around us." Her words were simple, almost childlike, yet they carried a weight far beyond her years. Keanu felt a lump rise in his throat. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay composed. "Why do you think I'm sad?" he asked finally, his voice quieter than before. It wasn't defiance or skepticism. He genuinely wanted to understand how these two strangers had managed to see through him so easily. Lily glanced at her sister, silently urging her to speak. Emma clutched her stuffed bear tightly, her knuckles turning white as she gathered her courage. "We watch your movies a lot," Emma began hesitantly. "Like a lot." She looked up at him, her big brown eyes wide with sincerity. "In some of them you're really strong and brave, like a hero. But sometimes you look like you're carrying something heavy. Like even when you're smiling, it doesn't reach your eyes." She paused, glancing at her sister for reassurance. Lily nodded encouragingly, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. Keanu stared at them, his heart pounding in his chest. These weren't just random observations. They were insights that cut straight to the core of who he was. No one had ever put it quite like that before. Not friends, not family, certainly not fans. And yet here were two little girls, standing in front of him in a crowded KFC, laying bare a part of him he'd worked so hard to keep hidden. "It's not just the movies," Lily added, stepping forward again. "We've seen pictures of you too. You always look nice and happy on the outside, but we can tell there's more to it. We're good at noticing things like that." She crossed her arms over her chest, as if daring him to disagree. Keanu couldn't help but chuckle softly at her confidence. Despite her young age, she carried herself with a maturity that was both endearing and disarming. For a long moment, Keanu didn't say anything. He simply knelt there, crouched down to their level, letting their words sink in. The restaurant buzzed around them, families chatting, kids laughing, employees shouting orders, but none of it registered. All he could focus on were the two pairs of eyes staring back at him, filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Finally, he spoke. "You're right," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do carry something heavy. Everyone does in their own way. But it's not always easy to talk about." He hesitated, unsure whether he should continue. Something about these girls made him want to open up, to let them in, even if just a little. "I've lost people I love," he said slowly. "And Sometimes it feels like the sadness never really goes away. Emma's lower lip quivered, and for a second, Keanu worried he'd said too much. But then she stepped forward, closing the gap between them. "We're sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That must hurt a lot." She reached out tentatively, placing her small hand on his arm. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried a warmth and empathy that caught Keanu off guard. He blinked rapidly, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. Lily moved closer too, her expression serious. "But you're not alone," she said firmly. "Even if it feels like you are sometimes, you're not. People care about you. Like us, we care about you." Her words were straightforward, devoid of any pretense or ulterior motive. They came from a place of pure innocence, untainted by the cynicism that often accompanies adulthood. Keanu felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He'd spent most of his life hiding behind a mask of stoicism, believing that showing vulnerability was a sign of weakness. Yet here were two children, complete strangers, reminding him of the power of connection and compassion. Their presence was a gift he hadn't realized he needed until now. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much that means to me." He reached out, gently ruffling Lily's curly hair and giving Emma's hand a light squeeze. "You're both very special." Emma beamed at him, her earlier shyness melting away. "We brought our bear today," she said, holding up the stuffed animal she'd been clutching. "He helps me when I'm sad. Do you want him?" She extended the bear toward him, her expression hopeful. Keanu hesitated, taken aback by the offer. The bear was clearly well loved, its fur worn in places and its button eyes slightly crooked, but to Emma it was obviously precious. I don't know," he stammered, touched by her generosity. "Are you sure?" Lily rolled her eyes playfully. "She's sure," she interjected. "That's why she offered. Emma doesn't give her bear to just anyone." She shot her sister a proud grin, which Emma returned shyly. Keanu accepted the bear with trembling hands, cradling it gently against his chest. "Thank you," he said again, his voice breaking slightly. "I'll take good care of him." Emma smiled brightly, satisfied that her mission had been accomplished. As the three of them stood there together, the world seemed to slow down. The noise of the restaurant faded into the background once more, leaving only the bond they had formed, a bond built on trust, understanding, and shared humanity. For the first time in what felt like forever, Keanu allowed himself to feel truly seen. And in that moment, surrounded by innocence and kindness, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. The moment Keanu accepted the stuffed bear from Emma, something shifted inside him. It wasn't just the weight of the girl's words, or the unexpected kindness they had shown. It was the way they seemed to see him so clearly, without judgment or pretense. As he held the worn-out bear in his hands, its soft fur brushing against his fingers, memories began flooding back. Memories he had buried deep, hoping never to relive them. But now, standing there in the middle of a bustling KFC with two little girls looking at him with wide, trusting eyes, those memories came rushing forward like waves crashing onto shore. He thought about his daughter first, the child he and his late partner Jennifer Syme had lost before she even had a chance to live. Ava Archer Syme Reeves had been born prematurely and passed away shortly after. The pain of that loss still lingered, sharp and unrelenting, even after all these years. He remembered holding her tiny body for the first time, feeling both awe and heartbreak simultaneously. She was perfect in every way, yet her life was cut tragically short. Keanu had never spoken much about her publicly. It was too painful, too personal. Yet here he was, decades later, holding a stuffed bear gifted by a little girl who reminded him of the innocence and fragility of childhood. Then there was Jennifer herself, the woman he had loved deeply, whose presence had once filled his life with light. Her death in a car accident had left him devastated, plunging him into a darkness he wasn't sure he'd ever escape. They had planned a future together, a family, a home, a lifetime of shared dreams. But fate had other plans. Losing her felt like losing a part of himself, and though he tried to move on, the void she left behind remained. People often saw him as the sad Keanu, sitting alone on park benches or riding the subway quietly. What they didn't understand was that his sadness wasn't just surface-level melancholy. It was rooted in profound grief, a grief he carried with him every single day. As these thoughts swirled in his mind, Keanu realized the little sisters weren't merely offering comfort, they were seeing parts of him he rarely allowed others to witness. Their observations weren't intrusive or cruel. Instead, they were infused with empathy and understanding. Lily's earlier comment replayed in his head. Sometimes people who act brave are actually very lonely. How could someone so young articulate such a complex truth? And why did it feel like she was speaking directly to his soul? Lily must have noticed the change in his expression because she reached out again, this time placing her small hand over his. "It's okay to be sad," she said softly, echoing what Emma had told him earlier. "But don't forget there are still good things too." Her voice was steady, almost wise beyond her years, and her words struck a chord deep within him. Keanu blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the simplicity and depth of her statement. For so long he had focused on the losses, the pain, the emptiness. He had convinced himself that happiness was fleeting, something reserved for others but not for him. But here was this little girl, reminding him that joy and sorrow could coexist, that, even in the darkest moments, there were still glimmers of light worth holding on to. Emma chimed in next, her voice timid yet earnest. "You make us happy," she said, clutching her sister's arm for support. "When we watch your movies, we feel brave, like we can do anything. But we also want you to know, you're brave too, even if it doesn't always feel like it." Keanu stared at them, his throat tightening with emotion. Brave? He hadn't thought of himself that way in years. To him, bravery meant facing battles head-on, conquering fears, emerging victorious. But maybe bravery wasn't about winning or losing. It was about enduring, about finding the strength to keep going even when the world felt heavy. Maybe courage looked different for everyone, and perhaps his version of bravery was simply surviving each day despite the weight he carried. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that," he whispered finally, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. He glanced down at the stuffed bear in his hands, then back at the girls. "Thank you. Both of you." Lily grinned, clearly pleased with herself. "We knew you'd like him," she said confidently. "Buddy always makes things better." Buddy, the name fit perfectly. The bear might look a little worse for wear, but its presence radiated warmth and love. Keanu hugged it closer to his chest, feeling an odd sense of comfort wash over him. For the next few minutes, the three of them stood there, talking quietly amidst the chaos of the restaurant. The girls asked him questions about his movies, giggling excitedly when he mentioned scenes they loved. They told him about their favorite characters and how they dreamed of becoming adventurers like the heroes in his films. Keanu listened intently, marveling at their imagination and enthusiasm. In their stories, he found echoes of his own childhood, the wonder, the curiosity, the belief that anything was possible. At one point, Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Do you think Buddy will help you find happiness again?" she asked innocently. Keanu smiled, touched by her optimism. "I think he already has," he replied sincerely. "Just meeting you two today has made me realize how lucky I am." Lily nodded approvingly. "Good," she said, "because happiness is everywhere. You just have to look for it. Like how we found you." Her words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. As he eventually made his way to a nearby table with his order of chicken and fries, Keanu couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. These two little girls, complete strangers, had managed to remind him of something vital, that while life is full of pain and loss, it is also brimming with moments of connection, kindness, and hope. And sometimes, all it takes is a simple act of compassion or a well-loved stuffed bear to reignite the spark of joy in someone's heart. By the time he finished his meal, Keanu felt lighter than he had in years. The rain outside had stopped, replaced by streaks of sunlight breaking through the clouds. It was as if the universe itself was mirroring the shift within him. Clutching Buddy tightly, he resolved to carry the lesson these girls had taught him wherever he went. That even in the darkest times, there is always room for light, and that being brave isn't about having all the answers, but about finding the courage to keep moving forward. Keanu sat at the small plastic table in the corner of the KFC, his tray of food barely touched. The bear, Buddy, rested on the seat next to him, its button eyes gazing out as if silently watching over him. He felt a strange mix of emotions, swirling inside: gratitude, sadness, relief, and something else he couldn't quite name. It was almost like hope, but not exactly. Whatever it was, it made his chest feel lighter, even though tears still pricked at the corners of his eyes. The restaurant buzzed around him, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing within one of its patrons. Families laughed over greasy buckets of chicken. Teenagers snapped selfies with their phones held high, and employees shouted orders from behind the counter. Yet none of it seemed real to Keanu anymore. All he could focus on were the two little girls who had walked into his life so unexpectedly and left an indelible mark on his heart. He glanced toward their table, where Lily and Emma were now seated with their mother. She looked warm and kind, her face lighting up as she listened to her daughters recount their encounter with him. Every now and then they'd point in his direction, giggling excitedly. Their mother caught his eye and gave him a polite wave, accompanied by a smile that radiated understanding. Keanu waved back awkwardly, unsure how to process everything that had just happened. But as much as he wanted to stay composed, the dam inside him finally broke. Tears spilled down his cheeks, and before he knew it, his shoulders began to shake. He buried his face in his hands, trying to muffle the sound of his sobs, but it was no use. The weight of years, decades, of bottled-up pain came crashing down all at once. He thought about his daughter, Ava, whose tiny hand he would never hold again. He thought about Jennifer, whose laughter still echoed faintly in his memories. He thought about all the lonely nights, the endless days of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't, and yet, through the grief, there was also gratitude for Lily and Emma, for Buddy, for this moment of raw, unfiltered connection. For the first time in what felt like forever, Keanu allowed himself to truly feel, not just the sadness, but the love too. The love those little girls had shown him without expecting anything in return. A few curious glances came his way, but most people either didn't notice or chose to look away. That's when Lily and Emma appeared beside him again, their faces filled with concern. "Are you okay?" Lily asked softly, placing a hand on his arm. Her voice was gentle, free of judgment or pity. Keanu wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket, forcing himself to sit up straight. I'm fine," he managed to choke out, though his voice trembled. Thank you. So much." Emma shuffled closer, clutching her sister's hand tightly. "Don't cry," she said earnestly, her big brown eyes shining with worry. "We didn't mean to make you sad." "You didn't," Keanu assured her quickly, reaching out to ruffle her hair affectionately. "You did the opposite. You reminded me of things I've forgotten. Or maybe things I stopped believing." He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Sometimes life gets really hard, and we forget that there's still goodness in the world. But today, you two showed me that kindness can come from anywhere, even from strangers in a KFC." Lily beamed proudly, clearly pleased with herself. "That's what Mom says too," she exclaimed. "She says even small acts of kindness can change someone's whole day." Keanu nodded, smiling despite the tears still clinging to his eyelashes. "Your mom is very wise," he said. Then after a pause, he added, "Do you think I could meet her? I'd like to thank her properly for raising such amazing daughters." The girls exchanged excited glances before grabbing his hands and pulling him toward their table. Their mother stood up as they approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and warmth. "Hi," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah. These two are my little adventurers." Keanu shook her hand firmly, his grip steady despite the whirlwind of emotion still coursing through him. "Thank you," he said sincerely, "for everything. Your girls, they're incredible. Truly." Sarah smiled, her eyes softening. "They've been talking about you nonstop since you walked in," she admitted. "When they saw you, they insisted we say hello. I didn't realize they'd end up giving you career advice and stuffed animals." Keanu chuckled, the sound genuine and heartfelt. "Well, I needed both," he confessed, "more than I realized." For the next hour, Keanu stayed at their table, sharing stories and laughter with Sarah and her daughters. They talked about movies, favorite foods, and random childhood memories. Lily recounted a hilarious tale about accidentally dyeing her hair green during a school science project, while Emma demonstrated her best impression of a velociraptor. Keanu found himself laughing harder than he had in months, the sound ringing out loud and clear in the crowded restaurant. As the conversation flowed, Keanu noticed how easy it was to connect with them. There was no pretense, no agenda, just pure, honest interaction. He realized how rare that had become in his life. Most of his interactions were filtered through layers of professionalism or guardedness. People either fawned over him because of his fame or kept their distance altogether. But here, sitting with this family, he felt seen, not as a celebrity, but as a person. At one point, Sarah leaned forward, her tone thoughtful. "You know, I think my girls have a gift," she said with a playful smirk. "They seem to know exactly what people need, even when those people don't realize it themselves." Keanu nodded, glancing at Lily and Emma, who were now coloring pictures on napkins with crayons borrowed from the kids' play area. "They do," he agreed. "Today, they gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Perspective, maybe, or just permission to let myself feel." Sarah studied him for a moment, her gaze kind. "It takes courage to be vulnerable," she said quietly, "especially for someone like you, who's always been so private. Don't underestimate the power of letting people in." Her words lingered in his mind long after they parted ways. Before leaving, Keanu hugged both girls tightly, promising to remember their kindness forever. Emma handed him a hastily drawn picture of Buddy surrounded by hearts, along with a note scrawled in crayon. "Don't forget, you're brave." As he stepped out of the KFC into the crisp evening air, Keanu clutched the drawing and the bear close to his chest. The rain had stopped completely, leaving behind a sky painted in hues of orange and pink. For the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful, not because his problems had disappeared, but because he had been reminded of the strength that comes from connection. Walking to his car, Keanu made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't let this moment slip away. He would carry the lessons these little sisters had taught him into every aspect of his life. Because sometimes the smallest voices hold the greatest wisdom, and sometimes the simplest acts of kindness can heal wounds you didn't even know were there. In the days that followed his unexpected encounter at KFC, Keanu found himself replaying every moment in his mind. The way Lily had looked at him with such knowing eyes, the tremble in Emma's voice as she offered him Buddy, the warmth of their mother's smile. It all felt surreal, like a scene from one of his movies. But this wasn't fiction, it was real life, and it had left an indelible mark on his heart. He couldn't shake the feeling that those two little girls had changed something fundamental within him. At first, he tried to go about his usual routine. He attended meetings for upcoming projects, read scripts, and even spent time practicing motorcycle stunts for a role he'd been preparing for. But no matter how busy he kept himself, his thoughts kept drifting back to that rainy afternoon. It wasn't just the kindness of the girls or their uncanny ability to see through his carefully constructed walls. It was the realization that they had reminded him of something he'd forgotten: the importance of human connection. Keanu began to reflect on his own journey, the highs and lows, the triumphs and tragedies. He thought about how he'd always prided himself on resilience, on pushing forward despite the pain. Over the years, he'd become adept at compartmentalizing his emotions, burying them deep so he could focus on work and survival. But now, he wondered if that approach had cost him more than he realized. Had he isolated himself too much? Had he missed opportunities to let others in, to share his burdens instead of carrying them alone? The answers weren't clear-cut, but one thing was certain. He didn't want to keep living that way. Those little sisters had shown him that vulnerability wasn't weakness. It was strength. They had seen his pain, acknowledged it, and responded with compassion rather than judgment. And somehow that simple act had given him permission to feel again. With newfound clarity, Keanu decided to make a change. He started small, reaching out to old friends he hadn't spoken to in years. He called his sister Kim, who lived across the country, and spent hours catching up on life. He reconnected with former co-stars and crew members, sharing stories and laughter over video calls. Each conversation felt like opening a window in a room that had been closed off for too long. Slowly but surely, light began to seep back in, but Keanu didn't stop there. Inspired by the kindness he'd experienced, he made a conscious effort to pay it forward. One weekend, he visited a children's hospital near Los Angeles, spending time with young patients and their families. He brought toys, books, and signed memorabilia. But what mattered most was the genuine connection he shared with each child. He listened to their stories, laughed at their jokes, and offered words of encouragement when they needed it most. For many of these kids battling illnesses far beyond their years, seeing someone like Keanu take the time to be present meant the world. During one visit, a young boy named Max caught his attention. Max was around 10 years old with bright blue eyes and a mop of unruly blonde hair. Despite being hooked up to machines and IVs, he radiated energy and curiosity. When Keanu sat down beside him, Max immediately launched into a detailed explanation of his favorite superhero movie, a film Keanu himself had starred in. "You're my hero," Max said earnestly, clutching a worn action figure modeled after Keanu's character. "I watch your movies when I'm scared or in pain. It makes me feel brave." Keanu felt a lump rise in his throat. "Well, you're pretty brave yourself," he replied, ruffling Max's hair affectionately. "Braver than I'll ever be," Maxie grinned, clearly pleased with the compliment. Then, after a pause, he added, "Do you ever get scared?" Keanu hesitated, thinking back to his own fears, the ones he'd carried silently for so long. "Yeah," he admitted finally. "Sometimes I do. But you know what helps? Knowing that I'm not alone. That there are people who care about me, even if I don't always see it right away." Max nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this new piece of wisdom. "That's cool," he said. "I think I'll remember that next time I'm scared." Moments like these reinforced Keanu's decision to embrace vulnerability and connection. He realized that while he might never fully escape the sadness that lingered within him, he didn't have to face it alone. There were people willing to stand by him, friends, family, fans, and all he had to do was let them in. As weeks turned into months, Keanu continued to open up, both personally and professionally. During interviews, he began speaking more candidly about his struggles with loss and grief. Instead of deflecting questions about his sad Keanu reputation, he leaned into them, using his platform to encourage others to seek support when they needed it. "We all carry things inside us," he told one interviewer, "and sometimes it feels easier to pretend everything is okay. But the truth is, we're stronger when we share our burdens, even if it's just with one person." His words resonated deeply with audiences around the world. Fans flooded social media with messages of gratitude, sharing their own stories of pain and healing. Many credited Keanu's openness with giving them the courage to reach out to loved ones or seek professional help. For someone who had always shied away from the spotlight, Keanu found immense fulfillment in knowing that his honesty could inspire others to do the same. One evening, as he scrolled through his phone before bed, Keanu came across a post from a fan named Rachel. Her caption read, "Thank you, Keanu, for reminding me that it's okay to not be okay. Your words gave me the strength to talk to my mom about my depression. We're working through it together now." Attached was a photo of Rachel and her mother, smiling brightly despite the challenges they faced. Keanu stared at the image for a long time, his chest swelling with emotion. This was why he had chosen to open up, to create space for others to do the same. In a world that often valued stoicism over vulnerability, he wanted to remind people that it was okay to be human, to feel, to struggle, to ask for help. Not long after, Keanu received another surprise, a letter from Sarah, the mother of Lily and Emma. Inside the envelope was a drawing made by Emma, depicting Keanu holding Buddy surrounded by hearts. Beneath the picture was a handwritten note. "Thank you for letting us help you, you're not alone." Keanu pinned the drawing to the wall of his home office where he could see it every day. It served as a constant reminder of the transformative power of kindness and connection. Every time he looked at it, he thought about Lily and Emma, their innocence, their empathy, their unwavering belief in goodness. They had taught him that even in moments of profound sadness, love and understanding could shine through. By embracing their lesson, Keanu discovered a renewed sense of purpose. He threw himself into charitable work, partnering with organizations that supported children and families facing adversity. Whether it was funding scholarships for underprivileged students or donating resources to hospitals and shelters, he poured his energy into making a difference. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about honoring the gift those two little girls had given him, the reminder that joy and sorrow could coexist, and that even in the darkest times, there was still light worth holding on to. As he stood, on set one morning preparing for a new project, Keanu glanced down at Buddy, who now rested on a shelf in his trailer. The bear had become a symbol of hope, a tangible representation of the kindness that had reignited his spirit. Smiling softly, he whispered, "Thanks, Buddy." And with that, he stepped outside, ready to face whatever lay ahead, not alone, but surrounded by the invisible threads of connection that bound him to others. Because sometimes all it takes is a single moment of grace to remind us of the beauty in being human. Months had passed since Keanu's life-changing encounter at the KFC, but its impact lingered in ways that continued to shape him. The lessons he'd learned from Lily and Emma, their wisdom wrapped in innocence, had become a guiding light, steering him toward a deeper understanding of himself and the world around him. What started as a simple afternoon turned into a ripple effect, touching not only his own life but also the lives of countless others. One crisp morning, Keanu found himself standing outside a bustling elementary school in Los Angeles. He had been invited to speak at a career day event for students, many of whom came from underprivileged backgrounds. As he walked through the gates, he couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. The playground buzzed with laughter and chatter, children running freely without a care in the world. It reminded him of his own childhood, and of the two little sisters who had unknowingly changed his perspective on life. Inside the auditorium, dozens of eager faces greeted him. Some recognized him immediately, gasping or whispering excitedly to their friends. Others simply stared curiously, unsure what to make of this tall, unassuming man wearing jeans and a leather jacket. Keanu stepped up to the microphone, smiling warmly as he adjusted it to his height. "Hi, everyone," he began, his deep voice carrying across the room. "I'm Keanu Reeves." A wave of applause erupted, though he quickly raised a hand to quiet them down. "But before we talk about movies or acting, I want to share something important with you all." The kids leaned forward in their seats, intrigued by his serious tone. Keanu took a deep breath, glancing briefly at Buddy, who sat perched on a nearby table where he'd placed him earlier. "Sometimes life can be really hard," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "You might lose someone you love or face challenges that seem impossible to overcome. And when those things happen, it's okay to feel sad. In fact, it's more than okay. It's human." A few heads nodded solemnly while others looked puzzled, trying to grasp the weight of his message. Keanu knelt down slightly, bringing himself closer to their level. "But here's the thing," he continued. "Even in the toughest moments, there's still goodness in the world. Sometimes, it comes from unexpected places, like strangers in a restaurant, or teachers who believe in you, or friends who stand by your side." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I learned this lesson recently, thanks to two very special girls. They reminded me that being brave doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. It means asking for help when you need it, and letting people care for you. The room was silent now, every child hanging on to his every word. For many of these kids, growing up in challenging circumstances meant learning resilience early, but it also often meant suppressing emotions or hiding struggles. Keanu hoped his story would encourage them to embrace vulnerability instead. After his speech, several students approached him, eager to ask questions or share their own experiences. One boy, no older than 9, tugged shyly on his sleeve. "My dad left us last year," he whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. "I miss him so much." Keanu crouched down, meeting the boy's gaze with compassion. "I'm sorry you're going through that," he said gently. "It's okay to miss him, and it's okay to cry if you need to. But remember, you're stronger than you think, and there are people who love you even if they show it differently." The boy sniffled, nodding slightly. Then, after a moment, he reached out and hugged Keanu tightly. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense meaning for both of them. As Keanu stood up, he realized how much these interactions fueled his desire to keep giving back. Each connection, no matter how brief, reinforced the idea that kindness could create chains of positivity that stretched far beyond what anyone might expect. In the weeks that followed, Keanu continued to honor the values he'd embraced since meeting Lily and Emma. He launched a foundation aimed at supporting families affected by loss, providing resources for counseling, education, and financial assistance. Inspired by Buddy, he partnered with a toy company to distribute stuffed animals to children in hospitals and shelters, ensuring that each one came with a handwritten note: "You are loved. You are brave." Word of his efforts spread quickly, earning praise from fans and peers alike. Yet Keanu remained humble, always deflecting attention back to the causes themselves. "This isn't about me," he told reporters during an interview. "It's about creating spaces where people feel seen and supported. If my story can inspire even one person to reach out, to offer kindness or ask for help, then it's worth it." And his dedication didn't go unnoticed. One evening, while attending a charity gala, Keanu was presented with an award for humanitarian work. As he accepted it, he dedicated the honor to Lily, Emma, and Sarah. "They taught me that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change someone's life, including mine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "So this is for them, and for anyone who has ever dared to care." Later that year, Keanu received another letter from Sarah. Inside was a photo of Lily and Emma, now slightly older but still full of the same boundless energy. They stood together in matching outfits, holding signs that read, "Be brave like Keanu." Beneath the picture, Sarah wrote, "Dear Keanu, we hope this finds you well. The girls haven't stopped talking about you since that day at KFC. They've started a kindness club at school, encouraging their classmates to perform random acts of kindness every week. Your visit inspired them to believe they can make a difference no matter how small. Thank you for being part of their journey and ours. With love, Sarah, Lily, and Emma." Keanu held the letter close to his chest, overwhelmed by gratitude. These two little girls, who had once whispered profound truths in a crowded fast food restaurant, had sparked a movement, one rooted in empathy, connection, and courage. Their actions proved that kindness wasn't just a fleeting gesture. It was a force capable of transforming lives. As he pinned the photo next to Emma's drawing on his office wall, Keanu reflected on the path he'd traveled since that rainy afternoon. He had gone from carrying his pain silently to sharing it openly, using his platform to uplift others. Along the way, he had discovered that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was strength. That joy and sorrow could coexist, and that even in the darkest times there was always light worth holding on to. Buddy sat quietly on the shelf, watching over everything. Though worn and weathered, the bear symbolized hope, a reminder that sometimes the simplest gifts carry the greatest power. Keanu smiled softly, knowing he would never forget the lessons he'd learned, or the two little sisters who had changed his life forever. And so, Keanu moved forward, carrying their words with him wherever he went. Whether on set, at a hospital, or simply walking down the street, he made it a point to connect, to listen, to care. Because in a world that often felt chaotic and disconnected, he believed in the transformative power of kindness and in the beauty of being human.